You may believe that no longer fearing solitude means you have become detached, difficult, or emotionally unavailable. You may look at the ease with which you close the door, silence your phone, or leave a gathering early, and wonder whether something in you has hardened. Perhaps you once needed constant reassurance that you still belonged. Now you can spend an evening alone without feeling abandoned, and part of you suspects this must be a failure of intimacy. But the deeper change is not that you have stopped needing people. You have stopped needing their presence to protect you from yourself. Carl Jung spent decades studying this movement, away from unconscious dependence and toward an inner life that can support its own weight. He understood that withdrawal is not always a rejection of life. Sometimes it is the psyche reclaiming energy from everything that has demanded your participation without nourishing your soul. There is a rare wisdom in an introvert who no longer fears being alone. It is not the wisdom of someone who has discovered that other people are unnecessary. It is the wisdom of someone who has learned the difference between connection and escape. You no longer automatically call company love. You no longer assume that being included means being understood. You no longer confuse noise with aliveness. This wisdom is rare because most people are trained to treat solitude as evidence that something has gone wrong. You are expected to prove your health through visibility. You are supposed to remain reachable, responsive, socially active, and emotionally available. The moment you stop performing those signals, others may become uneasy. They may ask whether you are all right, when what they really mean is that your withdrawal has interrupted the version of you they knew how to use. You may have participated in this confusion yourself. There may have been a time when an empty weekend felt humiliating. A quiet phone could make you question your worth. A canceled plan could feel less like free time and more like proof that you had been forgotten. You did not simply want company. You wanted relief from the thoughts that became audible when no one else was present. That is why your present comfort with solitude cannot be understood as a personality preference alone. Something psychological has changed. You have begun to tolerate your own interior world without immediately trying to alter it, distract from it, or offer it to someone else for interpretation. Jung described introversion as a movement of psychic energy toward the inner world. This does not mean shyness, social incompetence, or dislike of others. It means that your deepest orientation is shaped by what happens within you. External events matter, but you do not fully understand them until you have carried them inward, turned them over, and discovered what they awaken in your private psychological landscape. When this inward movement remains unconscious, it can become painful. You may isolate without knowing why. You may disappear from relationships rather than speak honestly within them. You may tell yourself that you prefer being alone, when what you actually fear is disappointment, conflict, exposure, or rejection. Unconscious solitude can become a shelter built from old injuries. Conscious solitude is different. It is not built to keep life out. It is built to let truth in. A person comes home after a crowded dinner and leaves the hallway light off. He places his phone on the table, sees 3 unread messages, and does not reach for it. He sits in the dark for several minutes, not because he is sad, but because he is noticing how exhausted he became while laughing at things he did not find funny. When he finally turns on the lamp, he understands that the fatigue began long before the dinner ended. That moment looks insignificant from the outside. Psychologically, it is a turning point. He has stopped treating discomfort as something that must be immediately corrected. He is allowing it to become information. This is what begins to happen when you no longer fear being alone. Your inner reactions no longer need to be silenced before they can challenge the life you have built. You can remain with an uncomfortable feeling long enough to learn what it is protecting. what it is refusing, and what it has been trying to tell you. What is at stake is not merely whether you enjoy your own company. What is at stake is whether you can become conscious without running back into the crowd every time consciousness threatens one of your arrangements. Solitude reveals which of your desires were borrowed. When you are constantly surrounded by other people, your wants become entangled with theirs. You absorb their urgency. You begin to desire what receives approval, attention, or admiration. A certain career appears meaningful because everyone around you treats ambition as virtue. A relationship appears successful because other people envy it. A lifestyle appears desirable because it photographs well. Jung understood that the persona, the social face you develop to meet the world, is necessary. You need a way to participate in society. You need roles, manners, language, and recognizable forms. The danger begins when the persona becomes so convincing that you forget it was created for adaptation. You begin serving the mask instead of allowing the mask to serve you. Solitude weakens the audience that keeps the persona alive. Without immediate feedback, borrowed desires begin to lose their force. You may discover that the goal you have pursued for years does not interest you when no one is watching. You may realize that your constant availability was not generosity, but fear. You may see that certain friendships survived because you performed enthusiasm, not because you felt intimacy. A woman spends months planning a promotion she has told everyone she wants. One Saturday morning, she opens her laptop to update her application and notices her hand resting motionless on the trackpad. She closes the computer, makes tea, and feels an unexpected wave of relief. She does not yet know what she wants instead. But for the first time, she knows that the old desire is not entirely hers. The uncertainty that follows can feel frightening. Yet what you are calling confusion may be the first honest space that has opened inside you. When borrowed desires fall silent, your authentic direction does not always arrive as a clear command. Sometimes it arrives first, as the inability to continue pretending. You become less willing to explain what you know inwardly. Before solitude becomes safe, you often depend on explanation as a form of permission. You describe every decision in detail. You justify why you are tired, why you need distance, why you changed your mind, or why something that seems harmless to others feels wrong to you. You hope that if you provide enough context, the people around you will approve your boundary and save you from the guilt of having one. But an inner life cannot mature while every truth must pass through an external court. Jung's process of individuation requires a gradual transfer of authority. The center of your life begins to move away from collective expectation and toward the deeper organizing principle of the psyche, which Jung called the self. This does not make you infallible. It makes you responsible. You can no longer hide behind agreement, convention, or the opinions of people who will not have to live with the consequences of your choices. A man receives an invitation to a weekend gathering he has attended for years. He writes a long message explaining his workload, deletes it, then writes another explanation about needing rest. After several minutes, he sends only 4 words: "I will not come." He places the phone face down and feels guilt rise in his chest, but he does not send a second message to soften the boundary. The wisdom is not in the refusal itself. It is in your ability to survive the moment when someone may misunderstand you. You no longer treat misunderstanding as proof that you have betrayed anyone. You begin to see that excessive explanation was often the price you paid to keep your inner truth from appearing too independent. Loneliness stops functioning as an emergency. You may still feel lonely. Freedom from the fear of solitude does not mean that you become immune to longing. It means that longing no longer controls your next action. You can feel the ache of disconnection without immediately returning to people who diminish you. You can miss someone without reopening a relationship that required your self-abandonment. You can want companionship without making yourself available to anyone who offers temporary relief. Jung recognized that powerful emotions can possess the personality when they remain unconscious. A feeling becomes dangerous when you cannot separate the experience from the command hidden inside it. Loneliness says, "You are alone." Possession turns that feeling into an order. Contact someone now. Return to what hurt you. Accept less than you need. Do anything to make this sensation stop. Consciousness places a small but decisive space between the feeling and the reaction. You still experience the loneliness, but you no longer obey it automatically. A woman wakes at 2 in the morning and reaches for her phone. Her thumb hovers over the name of someone who always answers, but never truly listens. She sets the phone back on the bedside table and lies still while the familiar emptiness moves through her body. In the morning, the loneliness remains, but the shame of having abandoned herself is absent. This is a form of strength that rarely looks dramatic. No one congratulates you for the message you did not send. No one sees the hour you endured without returning to an old dependency. Yet what you once called loneliness may now be the psyche teaching you that discomfort does not have the authority to choose your relationships. Your relationships become choices rather than anesthetics. When you fear being alone, you do not meet people only as they are. You also meet them as functions. One person regulates your anxiety, another confirms your attractiveness, another prevents silence, another allows you to avoid making decisions because their needs are always more urgent than yours. You may sincerely care for them, but the relationship is burdened with psychological work neither of you fully understands. As solitude becomes tolerable, those hidden functions begin to dissolve. You become capable of asking a more difficult question. Do you actually want this person in your life, or do you want what their presence prevents you from feeling? Jung believed that unconscious projections shape much of what people call love. You place disowned parts of yourself onto another person and then experience fascination, dependency, irritation, or idealization. The other person appears to contain something essential that you lack. You become attached not only to who they are, but to what your psyche has placed upon them. Time alone allows projections to weaken. You begin reclaiming the qualities you assign to others. The confidence you admired becomes a capacity you must develop. The tenderness you chased becomes something you must offer yourself. The direction you demanded from another person becomes your own responsibility. A man sits across from a friend who has dominated every conversation for years. He notices the familiar impulse to ask another question, laugh at another story, and disappear into the role of listener. This time, he leaves a pause. When the friend does not ask anything about his life, the silence reveals more than an argument would have. The realization may hurt, but it is clean. Your solitude has not made you incapable of connection. It has made you less willing to call one-sided emotional labor a bond. You are becoming able to love people without needing them to rescue you from your own presence. Silence allows the shadow to speak without taking control. The shadow is not merely a collection of aggressive, shameful, or socially unacceptable traits. It also contains the parts of you that were neglected because they threatened belonging. Your anger may be there. So may your ambition, sensuality, creativity, tenderness, decisiveness, and capacity to say no. Anything that could not be safely expressed may have been pushed outside your conscious identity. Constant social contact helps maintain that exclusion. Each interaction calls you back into a familiar role. You become the calm one, the helpful one, the reasonable one, the quiet one, or the person who never causes difficulty. The role becomes easier to inhabit each time someone rewards you for remaining predictable. Alone, you may encounter reactions that contradict the person you believe yourself to be. You may discover resentment beneath kindness. You may feel relief when someone leaves. You may admit that a duty you have performed lovingly has also made you bitter. You may recognize fantasies of escape that do not fit your moral self-image. Jung insisted that what remains unconscious does not disappear. It influences your choices from below. The more completely you identify with your socially acceptable qualities, the more likely the rejected opposite will emerge through passive aggression, sudden withdrawal, exhaustion, contempt, or inexplicable sabotage. A woman spends an afternoon helping a relative solve another avoidable crisis. She returns home, closes the door gently, and begins washing a cup that is already clean. When the handle slips from her hand and breaks, she hears herself whisper, "I am tired of saving you." She stands over the pieces and realizes the sentence was not about the cup. Solitude gives you somewhere to hear such truths before they become destructive acts. The anger that surfaces in silence is not proof that you have become cruel. It may be the psyche's refusal to continue disguising self-betrayal as patience. You learn that boredom is often a threshold rather than a problem. At first, silence can feel empty because your attention has been trained to expect stimulation. You reach for sound before you know you have done it. You open an application, refresh a page, check a message, play a video, or begin a task that does not matter. These actions may appear harmless, but together, they prevent the mind from descending beneath its familiar surface. Boredom is often the sensation you experience when the usual sources of psychic occupation have stopped working, but deeper material has not yet emerged. You are between layers. The outer world has become quiet, while the inner world has not yet trusted the silence. Jung's method of active imagination depended on the ability to remain near images, moods, and inner movements without immediately controlling them. He did not treat the unconscious as a machine that delivers answers on demand. He approached it as a living reality that reveals itself when the conscious mind becomes attentive enough to receive what it has excluded. A man spends Sunday afternoon without plans. He walks from one room to another, checks the refrigerator twice, and considers calling someone he does not particularly want to see. Instead, he sits beside the window and watches rain collect on the glass. After nearly an hour, a forgotten memory of drawing as a child returns with such clarity that he can see the worn edge of the pencil between his fingers. Nothing spectacular has happened, yet a thread has appeared. Beneath the boredom, a neglected life was waiting for enough silence to be remembered. Your discomfort with stillness was never proof that nothing existed within you. It was evidence that the path inward had become unfamiliar. When you stop fleeing the threshold, boredom can become the doorway through which your unlived life begins to return. Your pace stops being dictated by collective urgency. The world rewards visible motion. Quick responses appear competent. Constant activity appears meaningful. Immediate decisions appear confident. You may have learned to mistrust any rhythm that cannot be displayed as progress. But the introverted psyche often develops through incubation. You need time for an experience to become psychologically real. You may understand an event days after it occurred. You may sense that a decision is wrong before you can explain why. You may withdraw, not because you lack interest, but because your mind is still gathering meanings that have not yet formed into language. Jung's understanding of psychological types showed that not every mind meets reality in the same way. An introverted orientation draws experience inward and allows it to interact with memory, symbol, intuition, and unconscious association. This process may look slow from the outside. Internally, it can be exacting. A woman is asked during a meeting whether she supports a new plan. Everyone turns toward her, and she feels pressure to answer before the silence becomes uncomfortable. She says that she needs time. That evening, while placing a plate in the cupboard, she finally recognizes the flaw in the proposal and writes it down in one clear sentence. The delay was not indecision. It was fidelity to the way her mind reaches truth. When you no longer fear solitude, you stop apologizing for needing time to know what you think. What others call slowness may be your refusal to exchange psychological accuracy for social speed. Inner authority becomes quieter as it becomes stronger. At the beginning of psychological change, you may announce everything. You explain your awakening, your boundaries, your new values, and your revised understanding of yourself. You want others to witness the transformation because part of you still needs their recognition to make it real. As inner authority develops, the need for announcement often decreases. You become less interested in convincing people that you have changed. You simply stop participating in what no longer fits. You speak when speech serves truth, not when silence threatens your image. Jung did not describe individuation as the construction of a more impressive personality. It is the difficult process of becoming less divided. Your conscious identity begins to form a relationship with the neglected, contradictory, and unconscious parts of your nature. The result is not perfection. It is greater internal agreement. A man listens while relatives describe him according to choices he made 10 years earlier. He feels the old impulse to correct them, list his accomplishments, and prove that they no longer understand him. Instead, he takes a sip of water and lets the inaccurate description remain in the room. He realizes that their image of him no longer has the power to define what he must do next. This is not passivity. It is the end of unnecessary argument with people who are committed to an outdated version of you. Your silence is no longer empty when it contains a life you do not need to defend. Yet there is a more uncomfortable truth beneath all of this. Learning to be alone will eventually force you to see that some relationships depended on your fear of solitude. They survived because you were willing to overextend, over-explain, wait indefinitely, accept inconsistency, and translate neglect into complexity. You called yourself understanding because admitting the truth might have left you with fewer people. Once solitude no longer terrifies you, the structure of those relationships becomes visible. You notice who contacts you only when they need regulation, reassurance, labor, or an audience. You notice who becomes distant when you stop performing emotional usefulness. You notice how quickly affection turns into accusation when you become less available. This recognition carries a cost. You cannot unsee what becomes clear. The deeper cost is not simply that some people may leave. It is that you may have to grieve relationships while the people involved are still alive, still accessible, and still capable of offering just enough warmth to make you doubt yourself. There may be no dramatic betrayal, no final argument, no event severe enough to justify your withdrawal to everyone who asks. There may only be the persistent knowledge that you become less yourself in their presence. That knowledge creates responsibility. Before you could tolerate solitude, you could tell yourself that you had no choice. You needed the relationship. You needed the invitation. You needed the familiar voice, the shared history, or the protection of belonging. Now that you know you can survive the empty chair, the quiet evening, and the unanswered message, the old excuse loses its power. This is where solitude stops being comforting and becomes demanding. You may have imagined that inner freedom would feel like relief. Sometimes it does. At other times, it feels like standing in a doorway while the life behind you continues calling your name. You can return, but you can no longer return innocently. You know what the return requires. You know which part of yourself must become silent again. The shadow beneath the shadow is that you may still want approval from people whose approval requires your diminishment. You may still fantasize that one perfect explanation will make them understand. You may still hope that becoming clearer, kinder, or more patient will allow you to preserve the relationship without preserving the role you played inside it. Sometimes that is possible. Sometimes a relationship can change when you change. But sometimes the relationship was the role. Your solitude will also confront you with another danger. You can turn independence into superiority. You can use psychological language to disguise avoidance. You can call everyone unconscious when they disappoint you. You can treat your need for distance as proof that you are deeper, wiser, or more evolved. Jung warned repeatedly about inflation, the condition in which contact with the inner world makes the ego feel enlarged. The introvert who discovers the richness of solitude can begin to despise ordinary human needs. You may pretend that you no longer need affection because dependency once frightened you. You may call yourself selective when you are actually withholding. You may protect your peace so aggressively that nothing living is allowed to enter it. True solitude does not eliminate your need for relationship. It purifies it. You are still vulnerable. You can still be hurt. You still need people who can witness you without consuming you, challenge you without humiliating you, and remain present without demanding constant performance. The difference is that you no longer approach them from panic. You do not ask them to prove that you exist. This leaves you with a choice that no one else can make. Will you use solitude to become more available to truth? Or will you use it to become unavailable to life? The distinction may not be obvious from the outside. In both cases, you may spend more time alone. You may decline invitations, reduce contact, and become careful about where your energy goes. But inwardly, one form of solitude makes you more honest, more compassionate, and more capable of real encounter. The other makes you rigid, suspicious, and secretly afraid. The question is not whether you are alone. The question is what your aloneness is doing to your capacity to love. You are allowed to stop proving that you are socially healthy through constant availability. You are allowed to leave a message unanswered until you know what you want to say. You are allowed to enjoy an evening that produces nothing visible. You are allowed to refuse an invitation without inventing an emergency. You are allowed to let certain connections become quieter when maintaining them requires you to abandon your own rhythm. You do not need to turn solitude into an identity. You do not need to become the person who never needs anyone. That persona would imprison you as surely as the old one did. You are allowed to want companionship and still protect your inner life. You are allowed to feel lonely without interpreting the feeling as a command to return to what harmed you. You can stop fighting the fact that some truths arrive only when no one else is present. The rare wisdom of the introvert is not the ability to live without people. It is the ability to meet people without leaving yourself behind. You can enter a room without handing over the authority to define your mood, your value, or your direction. You can love without using love as an escape from consciousness. The quiet you once feared may now contain the most reliable relationship you have ever formed. Not because the self is always comfortable, but because it no longer disappears when the room becomes empty. You have not become detached simply because solitude no longer frightens you. You have become less willing to purchase belonging with self-abandonment. What looked like withdrawal may have been the moment your inner life finally stopped asking permission to exist. If this resonates, subscribe to The Waking Shadow, where you explore Jung's psychology and the path of individuation. Watch the video on your screen now to go deeper into the inner transformation that begins when you stop chasing connection and start becoming conscious within it.